Hello, my name is Karina Persois, and today I'll be talking to you about environmental racism. What is environmental racism? It is the tendency for minority areas in cities and metropolitan areas to be the targets of a disproportionate share of illegal dumpings and the sites where most toxic and hazardous waste is disposed. These communities also suffer as compared to more affluent white communities from lax enforcement to environmental regulations and laws. When looking at environmental racism, it is very easy to look at the system blame approach to the problem. There, it has been seen that the government and those waste companies target low-income neighborhoods close to the highways or heavy traffic corridors, waste treatment facilities, and manufacturing centers. It has seen that race is the strongest predictor of hazardous waste for facility locations, and 3 out of 5 African Americans and Latinos live in communities with abandoned toxic waste sites. When looking at the person blame approach, it is a bit harder. I believe that one example of a person blame would be people need to stop making so much waste. Environmental racism comes with many health issues. There's an increase in the risk of asthma, allergies, and other health problems in those areas. Those living in high opportunity neighborhoods tend to live about 20 years longer than those living in low opportunity neighborhoods. Blacks and Hispanics are less likely to have a consistent source of medical care and are more likely to use emergency rooms as a primary source of care. African Americans have a higher percentage of people with diabetes, and they also have a higher percentage of those in with HIV and AIDS compared to whites. Environmental justice. Environmental justice works on improving the environment and likes to bring attention to the injustice that occurs when a particular segment of the population, such as poor or minority groups, bears a disproportionate share of exposure to environmental hazards. They shed a light. Some examples of environmental racism is Hurricane Katrina and Flint, Michigan. In Hurricane Katrina, a lot of New Orleans and cities in Louisiana were very much affected by Hurricane Katrina, and the lower income and majority of Black neighborhoods have yet to get a lot of help. Flint, Michigan is another example of environmental racism. In Flint, Michigan, their water is still contaminated, and it is believed that due to the fact that those who live in Flint, Michigan are a majority of African Americans and low income people, then that's why they're not getting the direct help that they need. Rethinking environmental racism. There is a spatial relationship between environmental hazards and community demographics. Various forms of racism contribute to environmental racism, such as white privilege. Whites have secured relatively cleaner environments by moving away from older industrial cores via suburbanization. Suburbanization and decentralization contributes to environmental racism. Whites move away from the cities and they make their housing prices a little higher, and they just leave the area, leaving low incomes people in the city. And since they have left, not a lot of renovation and cleaning is done in that area due to the majority and the more high opportunity neighborhoods are outside of the city. There is a functional relationship between places, industrial and residential. The industrial relationship with residentials, there's the industry that has to do with toxic waste is leaving waste in residential areas, and they're setting up their facilities in areas where people live, which is affecting their health from the ground up. Kettleman City, California has a good example of environmental racism. It is a farm worker community. 95% of them are Latino. There is a high level of poverty, and it is the largest toxic waste dump west of Alabama. Amil, Alabama is another good example of environmental racism. It is 95% African American. It is a small rural area and is poverty stricken. This is the largest toxic waste dump. History of environmental racism in the U.S. Environmental racism was a term that Reverend Benjamin Chavez first used, and his definition of environmental racism is racial discrimination in environmental policy making and the enforcement of regulations and laws, the deliberate targeting of people of color communities for toxic waste facilities, the official sanctioning of the life-threatening presence of poisons and pollutants in our communities, and the history of excluding people of color from leadership in the environmental movement. Some ways society can remedy the problem is reducing toxic waste. They can find alternatives to throwing away the waste, and can also find ways to clean up low-income areas, maybe raise money or actually have a program that can clean up these places and make them safe for residents to live in. Thank you.